Hi, my name is Mark and welcome to Three Bridges Model Railway. This is a new YouTube channel where I'm going to try and document the building of my first railway layout for about 48 years. So I guess like me, when you watch a new YouTube channel, you're thinking, why are they building a model railway? Why do they want to document this on YouTube? And what are they going to build? What era is it going to be? DCC, DC, what gauge? Configuration, all those sort of things. A load of questions actually that probably about a year ago even I couldn't answer for you. So I'm going to start by just sort of winding the clock back in terms of why build a model railway. So about a year ago, last child is leaving home, going off to university, and my wife and I decided we didn't really need to live in the Midlands anymore. We could live anywhere in the country, and we really liked the idea of moving near the coast. So with that, you then de-junk what you have in your house to clear out the clutter that you sort of accumulated over decades. And in the loft was a couple of boxes from my childhood, and these contained my original model railway. And I've never been able to throw them away for a very good reason, I think. They bring back a lot of memories, happy memories from my childhood of building my first layout. I went on YouTube to have a look around to see what information there was that you could get about how to go about starting to build a new layout. And there were three early videos that really caught my attention. The first one, which I've never been able to find since, was by an American guy. He had a whole basement, huge layout that ran around the room. And he basically took you on a journey through part of his life and the local train set up in sort of the east coast of America. And what he was saying is you don't have to create the whole town, the whole village, the whole mountainside. You can take aspects of them to recreate those situations and sceneries. And so that was quite an interesting idea that I could probably build more into the layout than I'd originally had in my normal childhood sort of run around loop. The second one I came across was Michael at Chandwell. He was building his signal box, and I was just blown away by scratch building and what he could achieve with just a few simple materials and tools on a very small scale. And so that really ignited my imagination that could I actually scratch build a lot of the stuff myself. However, I was very conscious of the fact I hadn't built anything for so long. Probably I needed to start it with some kits just to get back into how buildings are structured and put together. And then the final one I went looking for was, well, where do you start? And I came across Mark Lino of Sweden, a great channel. And one of his episodes, Mark takes you through 5 key points to think about before you start building a model railway. Okay, he starts with 5, it ends up at about 20. Okay, so Mark's initial point is, do you do prototype or do you do freelance? i.e., do you recreate something you know and have experienced, maybe from your childhood, or do you just create a railway out of your imagination? So for me, the prototype going back to a childhood really sort of appealed, and I think that's quite a common one that people do start with a layout. So Mark's second point was create a line diagram. Okay, have something to refer back to in the future for what your original idea was. He's basically saying, as time goes on, your imagination will just take over and you'll go down rabbit holes and you'll radically change the design of the layout. So having a line diagram of the initial concept is a good way to just go back and check, are you happy with that change that you're going to make, or have you actually created a whole new layout design? His point that he also tagged onto that one was, don't be over ambitious, but I think like most people, I've failed in that one 100%. The second one is layout configuration. And I hadn't really given this any thought at all. So I'd been used to a tail chasing run around loop, and I realized I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to have a layout where a lot of my stock in that sits somewhere else in a fiddle yard and is sort of brought up onto the layout and then goes away again. I wanted to have all the stock that I do own and will own actively on the layout and in use. I know that's going to minimize the amount of stock I have, but that's what I was thinking about. And I sort of realized you could have dog bones and end-to-ends. And it was the end-to-end design of starting and finishing that sort of also captured that imagination from a childhood memory of my first ever train journey. His third point was filling the space. Basically, he's saying you're limited by the space of your room in terms of what you can build. And that's a really good point. So at this point in our lives, I didn't have a space. I had a cupboard about 1.5 meters in length and about 40 centimeters deep where I could start something. So some of the other points, I suppose, that weren't in Mark's original list, but he does touch on them. Freight or passengers? I'm going to go passengers. It's what I've experienced. I've got a little bit of freight stock, but I quite enjoy the journey itself. Time of year, I just really hadn't thought about that with the original layout. So for me, my favourite time of year is autumn. So that fixes that. So the last point was, do I make the layout DC or DCC? Or could I do both? And that created an interesting seed of an idea, which I'll come to later. Okay, so what did I want to include? Well, I'm really keen to obviously keep that original rolling stock I had all those years ago. It's only 4 engines and a few carriages, so I didn't really see a problem of including it. Obviously the track, which is old Hornby track, is knackered and just wants thrown away, so I'll start afresh on that. I also had some original buildings. I'll show you those later. They don't look great. They're quite, having lived in a loft for 40 years with temperature cycles, they're quite warped and distorted, and they weren't the most expensive buildings back in the day. But a number of the buildings were built by my dad for me when I was about 10. He didn't make much for me, and I can't really bring myself to throw them away. So I've worked out a way that I can probably incorporate them into just one station. And we'll see how it turns out. I suppose the next point is the scale. What do I mean by that? Something you need to think about. So do you want to run full-length prototypical trains? Typically 8+ carriages is going to mean you're going to need a station length of over 2 meters. But for the layout, I wanted to create a number of stations. So I'm going to limit myself to 3 car DMUs, or maybe 3 carriages and a small engine. So my stations will typically be about 1 meter in length. Having the smaller trains also means you can have a bit of a tighter curve and smaller points you can get away with. Okay, so I've talked about what I do want to do. Now my list is, what don't I know? And there's quite a lot. So scenics, back in the day, it was just a bit of paint slapped on. There's so much more to learn and understand and do. Wiring up of electrics. Yeah, I've been reading the books for about a year and I'm still confused. So I think I'm going to need some help there through the channel. Ballasting your track. This one seems to be like the Marmite of model railway. Some people do, some people don't. Some people clearly don't enjoy it. And I suppose lastly, scratch build. I don't know a lot. I have over the last year gone through every episode that Michael's created, some of them several times over, and it has really helped me in some of the initial buildings that I have now started to scratch build for myself. And I can see I'm slowly making improvement, but I know that there's going to be a lot of questions and asks for help from yourselves in terms of how do I do certain components on builds. Okay, so what don't I want to do? I don't want to spend the next couple of years building the infrastructure for the layout. I've been watching a number of channels where they are building huge, quite ambitious layouts, and you can see that it's going to take 2 years to do the framework. Then they might get onto laying some track and some of the electrics, but they're not going to be scenicking anything for 4 or 5 years yet. So I thought I'd flip it the other way. You don't have to build the whole layout in one go. I'm going to start with a small section, about 1 meter to 1.5 meters, and it will allow me to lay the track, do the electrics, do the scenics, build the buildings on one board, and then I will move on to the next board and start again. And this way, build up the layout in a modular structure. I think this way is going to help me learn, but then I can stop and go back on the next section and see if I've improved. I think I'm going to make better progress for me, and it will keep me happier doing it in that sort of way. Okay, so I suppose that brought me to where do I start? And so I've decided to start with my first ever railway journey that I remember. I'm 5 years old and I'm travelling with my parents up to London from a small station called Wendover in Buckinghamshire.